Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going deep into the world of Islamic scholar Javed Ahmad
Oh
Ghamidi,
yeah, Javed Ahmad Ghamidi.
a figure known for his progressive interpretations of Islam and sparking quite a bit of debate.
Definitely, his views often challenge traditional understandings, which has made him a controversial,
Right.
but a highly influential figure.
Exactly. He really makes you think critically about faith.
Yeah,
And for this deep dive, we're going to be focusing on two specific topics, beards and veiling.
okay,
These are areas where Gamidi's views have sparked a lot of
for
discussion,
sure.
and to be honest, some head scratching.
Yeah, I think it's because these topics touch on something we all kind of grapple with,
Yeah.
that intersection of faith and reason
Oh, absolutely.
and cultural norms.
Right.
How do we balance personal beliefs with tradition and intellectual inquiry?
Right. And that's what makes Ghamidi so interesting. We're working with a series of interviews where he directly addresses objections to his views.
Okay.
It's like a behind-the-scenes look
Uh-huh.
at how he approaches these complex issues.
And by understanding his arguments, you get a glimpse into how he engages with the core sources of Islamic knowledge.
Yes.
The Quran, the Sunnah, the Hadith.
Okay, let's jump right in. The first objection we'll tackle is a common one. Why doesn't Ghamidi have a beard?
Okay?
If it's considered a sunnah, a recommended practice of the Prophet Muhammad.
This is where we see Ghamedi's unique methodology.
Okay.
He doesn't just blindly follow tradition.
Yeah.
He emphasizes this rigorous process of research. And at the core of his understanding of Islam
Okay.
is this concept of fitra.
Fitra. Okay, I'm intrigued. Can you break that down for us?
So fitra essentially refers to innate human nature.
Uh-huh.
Ghamidi believes the Quran points to this idea that humans have a natural inclination
Okay.
towards good and an aversion to evil.
Mm.
It could just that we're not just born blank slates.
So it's like we have this built-in moral compass.
Exactly.
Okay.
Think about it. Have you ever felt this natural pull towards fairness or justice, even when it was inconvenient?
Yeah.
Or went against the grain?
Totally.
The media would say that's fitra in action.
I can definitely relate to that. So how does this concept of fitra relate to the beard debate?
So Ghamidi argues that the Quran doesn't explicitly mention beards as part of fitra
Okay.
or as a religious obligation.
That's a pretty bold statement considering how many people view beards as like a fundamental
Yeah,
part of Islamic practice.
it is bold, and he doesn't stop there. He goes on to challenge the assumption that all of the Prophet Muhammad's actions were intended as religious directives,
Oh, wow.
like for everyone.
He actually uses a really interesting example to illustrate this point.
Oh, yeah?
It involves the Prophet making a comment about date palm cultivation
Uh-huh.
and later clarifying that it wasn't meant as like a religious instruction.
Right, it was just a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of how we need to be careful
Yeah.
in distinguishing between cultural practices
Right.
and actual religious commandments.
It's so easy to get those mixed up. Just because the Prophet did something doesn't automatically make it
Right.
a binding religious practice for all Muslims for all time.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. But it brings up another question. If beards aren't obligatory, why are there so many hadith sayings of the Prophet about beards?
Yeah.
Some of them seem pretty specific about length and style.
Ghamidi acknowledges the importance of hadith as a source of Islamic knowledge,
Okay.
but he also emphasizes the need for careful contextualization and analysis. Remember, these are narrations of the Prophet's words and actions passed down
Right.
through generations.
Yeah.
And that transmission process means they can be subject to human error
Totally.
or misinterpretation.
It's like that game of telephone.
Exactly.
We played as kids.
Yes.
The message can get totally twisted along the way.
Exactly. And Ghamidi even points to a hadith where the narrator admits to forgetting a key detail.
Wow.
It highlights how inaccuracies can creep into these transmissions.
That's a good point, which reminds me of the hadith from Abu Umama al-Bahili.
Yes.
This one seems to give us some crucial context
Okay.
for understanding the Prophet's instructions on beards.
Okay.
In this hadith, it seems like the Prophet's instructions were primarily about opposing the styles
No.
of non-Muslims of that time
Right.
who wore their beards in a way that was considered arrogant.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't seem to be about setting a specific beard length
Right.
for all Muslims for all time.
It's about the context.
It's like those situations where you hear someone say something totally out of context
Exactly.
and it changes the meaning completely.
100%.
Ghamidi is really trying to avoid that with these hadith. He wants us to dig deeper.
Yes, he's urging us to consider the historical and social circumstances surrounding these sayings.
Right.
We can't just impose our own assumptions on them.
Which brings us to another area where Ghamidi's views are often debated, veiling. He argues that the Quranic verses commonly used to justify strict veiling need to be understood within their historical and social context.
Right. And his interpretation of these verses has drawn criticism from scholars like Malala Maududi,
Okay.
who accused those arguing against traditional veiling practices
Wow.
of trying to undermine Islam and blindly imitate Western culture.
That's a serious accusation. How does Ghamidi respond to those kinds of accusations?
He strongly denies them, emphasizing his own traditional upbringing and the years he's dedicated to researching these topics. He argues that his interpretations come from a deep understanding of Islamic sources,
Right.
not a desire to conform to Western ideals.
Okay, so how does Ghamidi interpret the verses on veiling, specifically those in Surah Atzab?
He argues that Surah Atzab was revealed during a time when the Prophet and his family were facing
Okay.
intense slander and social pressure.
Wow.
The verses, often interpreted as general commandments for veiling,
Right.
were specifically directed at the Prophet's wives to protect their reputation
Okay.
and maintain their unique position.
So understanding the charged atmosphere of that specific time
Yeah.
is crucial to interpreting those verses.
Absolutely. Imagine witnessing how a single event can completely change the dynamic
Yes.
of a community.
Uh-huh.
That's the kind of context surrounding the verses in Surah Azab.
And what's fascinating is that Ghamidi's interpretation, while controversial, is actually supported by a number of other scholars
You're right.
throughout Islamic history.
His views aren't coming out of nowhere.
Right.
They're part of a larger conversation that's been going on for centuries within Islamic scholarship.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So we've seen how Ghamidi uses that historical context to understand the verses in Surah Al-Azab. But
Right.
what about the verses in Surah An-Nur?
Okay.
Those seem to be directed at a wider audience.
Yeah.
And talk about veiling in a more general sense. What's Ghamidi's take on those?
This is where his deep dive into the language of the Quran gets really interesting.
Okay.
He points out that the specific word
Uh-huh.
used in Surah An-Nur to describe what women should use to cover their chests is himar.
Okay, himar. What's the significance of that word?
So Ghamidi argues that himar refers to a type of headscarf
Okay.
that was commonly worn by women during the Prophet's time,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a face veil.
Okay.
So he's making a distinction between covering the chest, which the verse explicitly mentions,
Right.
and covering the face, which it doesn't.
So he's not saying that the verses in Surah An-Nur are irrelevant to the discussion of veiling,
Right.
but that they might not be talking about what people often assume they're talking about.
Exactly. And beyond the specific word choice, Ghamidi also looks at the broader context
Okay.
of the verses in Surah An-Nur.
Okay.
He argues that they're about promoting modesty
Uh-huh.
and respectful interactions between men and women,
Okay.
rather than mandating a specific type of covering.
This is starting to sound familiar.
Yes.
It's like with the beard example, he's looking at the historical context to understand the intent behind the verses.
Yeah,
Rather than just taking them literally.
you got it. He's trying to get at the heart of what the Quran is trying to achieve with these guidelines on veiling.
Right.
And he believes it's about fostering a society
Okay.
where men and women interact in a way that is dignified and respectful.
That makes sense. But if that's the case, why do some people interpret these verses as requiring a face veil
Okay.
or even a full body covering?
Ghamidi would say that those interpretations often come from reading later cultural norms
Okay.
back into the Quranic text.
Mm-hmm.
He's very insistent that we have to try to understand these verses
Okay.
in the context of the time they were revealed.
Right.
And he emphasizes that during the Prophet's time, women were active participants in society. They went out for work,
Okay.
ran errands, interacted with men in public spaces.
So he's painting a picture of a society that was, in some ways, more open and less restrictive than what we often associate
Yeah,
with traditional interpretations of Islam.
that's what his research suggests.
Okay.
He believes that the Quran's guidelines on veiling
Mm-hmm.
should be understood in that context as promoting a general sense of modesty and decorum,
Right.
not as imposing strict seclusion on women.
This raises a really interesting question. How much of what we consider Islamic tradition
Yes,
is actually rooted in cultural practices that developed later rather than explicit Quranic directives?
exactly.
It's like what we were talking about with the beard and the example of the date palm cultivation.
It's exactly that. And Ghamidi is really urging us to be discerning.
Yeah.
He's not saying that tradition has no value,
Right.
but he's encouraging us to be critical thinkers and to make sure that our understanding of Islam is firmly grounded in the original sources.
That's what makes this deep dive so valuable.
Right.
We're going back to those sources,
Yeah.
examining them carefully, and trying to understand them for ourselves.
Precisely. And as we wrap up our exploration of Ghamidi's views on beards and veiling, I think the key takeaway
Yeah.
is that his approach isn't just about being progressive for the sake of it. It's about a deep commitment to reason context and a rigorous engagement with the original sources of Islam.
He's not afraid to ask tough questions and challenge assumptions, which
Absolutely.
is something we can all learn from, regardless of our personal beliefs.
I agree.
And before we go, I have to ask if cultural context is so important for interpreting these ancient texts.
Yeah.
How can we as modern readers make sure we're not imposing our own assumptions and biases onto them?
That's such a crucial question, and honestly, it's a question each of us has to wrestle with as we engage with these texts. There's no easy answer, but the very act of asking that question is a step in the right direction.
Right.
It forces us to be more self-aware and to approach these texts with a sense of humility and open-mindedness.
It reminds me of what we were talking about earlier, that sense of fitra, that innate human inclination towards good and aversion to evil. Maybe by tapping into that, by being honest with ourselves about our own preconceptions, we can come closer to understanding these texts in a way that's both authentic and meaningful.
That's a beautiful thought, and it really highlights the importance of approaching these texts with a sense of intellectual honesty and a genuine desire to understand rather than just to confirm our existing beliefs.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Javed Ahmad Ghamidi.
It's been a pleasure.
His approach to Islam is thought-provoking, challenging, and ultimately, I think, very hopeful.
I agree.
It reminds us that faith and reason aren't mutually exclusive, and that by engaging in a deep, honest exploration of our beliefs, we can arrive at a more fulfilling and meaningful understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time. It seems like Ghamidi is all about going back to those original sources and really wrestling with them, considering the historical context, the language, the intent. It's not about just blindly accepting tradition, but it's about engaging in a thoughtful, critical examination of what these texts are actually saying.
That's a great observation. And what's so fascinating is that this approach, while it might seem radical to some, is actually deeply rooted in Islamic intellectual history. There's a long tradition of scholars who have engaged in this kind of rigorous textual